Well, we're about to watch them again as we move to agenda item 5. We'll turn the time over to Chair Carey.
Thank you, Chair. This is our report from the Law and Licensing Committee. Item 5.2 is an information item, and I know we usually just mention that, but if I may, Chair, AAG Beal took the time to put together a very comprehensive review of the 4-day school week instructional time, and it was very informative. And if any of you have not had the opportunity of seeing that presentation, I would ask that, well, I was going to ask that you watch Law and Licensing, but don't do that. Just ask AAG Beal for a copy of that presentation. It is well worth your time, especially as we see more and more waiver requests coming through. So thank you. Moving on to item 5.3. This is the R277 121 board policy. No, excuse me. This is the board waiver of administrative rules, an amendment, and the motion before the board is that the board approve R277-121 board waiver of administrative rules draft 2 on second and final reading.
Thank you, Chair Carey. The motion has been stated. Member Earl.
I have an amendment. So if you go to, thank you. Let me tell you what the amendment is first. So it would be to strike lines 20 through 25 from the second draft. That's what's being moved, right? Second draft. Okay, and then inserting a line in place of those that says an LEA's written waiver request shall include how the waiver will support the learning environment and lead to educational excellence. And then if I get a second. There you go.
It sounds like we have a second. Can we just give 1 minute for that to come up on the screen to get all board members on the same page?
Yep, and then I'll speak to
yes, please.
the rationale. Yes, 20 through 25.
So you're striking out the language the committee added?
No, not all of it. Some of it.
Go ahead and speak to that.
Yeah, I'll speak to it. The language there adds a layer of complexity that, depending on who's evaluating it from within USBE or wherever, or whatever the health department, or we've experienced that over the years. Whatever they decide is the health safety or whatever. It depends on whether this moves forward. I think it just stifles initiative. It stifles local schools actually maybe looking at some waivers from things that would be beneficial. But I think they need to tell us how it's going to support their learning environment. I think they need to tell us how it's going to align with our desire for educational excellence. I don't think it will accomplish the same thing, but I think the other just adds a layer of complexity. So.
Thank you, Member Earl. Any other additional questions? Or let me restate the motion that's before us now. So this is an amendment to the original motion, and the amendment is that the board strike lines 20 through 25 from draft 2 and insert line 28, and insert at line 28, parenthesis 3, an LEA's written waiver request shall include how the waiver will support the learning environment and lead to educational excellence. Seeing no additional, Member Lear.
I'm doing this on the fly, so I'm hoping that it'll be reasonably straightforward. I think it's important, well, I won't speak to it, I'll just suggest the amendment, because I think Member Earl has introduced an opportunity of what the LEA requesting the waiver could do in a positive way. I'd like to add to that something that I have thought for a while should be in this, and that also is often in these requests, and I've listened to them for all the time I've been on the board. So I've actually spoken to it before I'm giving you the amendment. But my amended would be support learning environment lead to, and it would be an additional. You've added a 3. You could either, and the rule writers can tell me if you want to have a run-on sentence or if you want to add an A and B. But the other thing I think we need is any other information, additional information that the LEA finds helpful for the board to make a decision regarding the waiver. And that would allow the LEA, can I continue to speak to my motion, which I've broken up with
Well,
my motion?
let's go ahead and make sure we get your motion on correctly, and then we'll get it seconded if
Sure.
there is
I'd
favor
like,
there. And then we'll speak to it. So let's make sure we get it on the
Gotcha.
correct on the screen first. And it looks like after you will get to, yeah.
Let me change that just a little, to make an informed decision regarding the waiver. Thanks,
how
that
does that
does
look?
reflect my
Okay,
motion.
so the motion then is that the board add and, parenthesis 4, any other additional information that the LEA finds helpful for the board to make an informed decision regarding the waiver. Back to you, Member Lear.
And I'm sorry, just a little bit of a grammatical tweak first. The LEA believes the board would find helpful.
Did we get a second on that?
a second.
Second from Vice Chair Hart. Thank you.
And can I just conclude in a couple of sentences? I have found when these requests are made that the better requests come with more information. So I want to make sure we leave the door open and in fact encourage LEAs who are making these requests to give us additional information so that the committee first and then the board can make an informed decision. And so I think some of the information that was in the lines that were struck by Member Earl's amendment could perhaps provide helpful information, and I'd like to leave that door open for the LEA to provide that information if that would be the belief that it would help the board. So that's why I'm making that amendment.
Thank you, Member Lear. And to remind the board, I know I want to make sure we're all on track here. We are speaking now to Member Lear's amendment, not to Member Earl's. So, Member Bollinger.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to speak to the original motion so I can wait in the queue.
Thank you. Okay, so seeing no lights, let's go ahead and prep the vote. So again, the motion before the board is that the board add and, parenthesis 4, any other additional information that the LEA believes that the board would find helpful to make an informed decision regarding the waiver. That the LEA believes the board, there you go. Okay, it's on your screen. Let's go ahead and vote. Thank you, board members. That passes unanimously. We are back to the amended motion presented by Member Earl and Member Bollinger. Again, this is to Member Earl's motion. Perfect. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. If I may ask a question to the maker of the original motion.
Member Earl, a question's coming your way. Okay.
Member Earl, I know on your original motion, you started the strike at lines 20. So I just wanted to verify that you are wanting to strike the requirement for an LEA to vote in an open meeting.
Open meeting part there.
Draft 2.
Okay, I just want to
I'm
make sure I'm
looking
looking
at
at the
draft
right
2
draft.
and it doesn't,
It's
I-
a
I'm
subsection
not-
B to section, or
D, B, C, and D, but it doesn't, that would benefit, I don't see that in there.
Okay.
So
that
maybe
was
you're
in
looking at draft 1.
Okay, so
Yeah.
draft 2. So, okay.
yeah, I
I just want
don't
to make
want
sure we
that
still have
stricken,
that
yeah.
requirement.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
okay, so the motion before the board then is that the board amend the draft 2, that the board strike lines 20 through 25 from draft 2 and insert at line 28, 3. Well, it would be, beginning at line 28, is that right? Yes, don't read number 4. Okay. An LEA's written waiver request shall include how the waiver will support the learning environment and lead to educational excellence, and, as we have voted to put this in there, any other additional information that the LEA believes the board would find helpful to make an informed decision regarding the waiver. Let's go ahead and vote. That passes unanimously. That brings us back to the original motion, and that would be that the board approve R277-121, Board Waiver of Administrative Rules, Draft 2 as amended on second and final reading. Let's go ahead and vote. For clarity, we are voting for to move this rule as amended. So if you have other amendments, I would suggest that you vote yes so that you can be on the favoring side, and then you can bring it back. There we go. Well, that passes unanimously. Back to Chair Carey.
Chair Hymas, if appropriate, I'd like to make a motion to bring back R277-121. I do have another motion pending, and I apologize that I didn't get that in sooner, but I was reading like 672 emails. So,
Is there a second to that motion? Is there any opposition to bringing this back? Hearing none. Chair Carey.
thank you. And I believe Ben said he had the motion queued up. Thank you. And I'd like to speak to the motion when once the board has had the time to digest it.
If you'd like to state the motion, and then we'll digest as you're reading it, and then we'll get a second and go from there.
Thank you. The motion is that the board amend draft 2 as follows. Line 32 through 33 would read verification that the LEA board voted to request the waiver in an open meeting with the results of the waiver request. Line 34, subsection B would read data that support the requested waiver, which shall include, if possible. Line 36, subsection II, community staff and student survey data. Line 37, subsection III, student enrollment data. Lines 116 through 119, 3A, an LEA may request the superintendent to waive the school day and hour requirement in the event of a public health emergency. And line 134, 3G would read, any waiver request granted pursuant to subsection 3 shall be subject to board approval no later than 45 days after it's granted. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Do we have a second? Second from Member Earl. Back to you, Chair Carey.
Thank you. And again, I apologize for the late submission, but as I was reviewing the rule in preparation for the meeting, I noticed that we do request that the LEAs provide us with proof that a vote was taken at their board meeting, but there was no requirement for them to produce the results of that board meeting, and that's line 32 through 33. And line 34, I believe this is necessary just given the volume of waiver requests we are receiving. Law and Licensing has 2 more tomorrow. And right now, it's very unstandardized what an LEA has to produce because it say they may produce this, they may produce that. So it's rare for us to be in a situation where we can compare apples to apples. So this says if you have it, you should provide this or you shall provide this. And that would allow us more consistency of the data that we have coming in, which I believe will allow us to better understand are these waiver requests working over time? And I don't believe we can do that if we don't share common data. And again, that's the purpose of line 36, just an attempt to get more data where possible. Same as line 37. That's why we're taking out the or and inserting the and. Lines 116 through 119, and I wasn't here during this period, but it looks like these provisions were passed during COVID. And during that time, the board, in certain situations, would not grant the waiver, but the superintendent. And I understand the need for that, the quickness of action. And so what I'm doing here is, or what I would like to do here is that the superintendent still retains the right to waive the school day and hour requirement in the event of a public health emergency. But, and that's why we're adding line 134, which is that waiver that's granted pursuant to subsection 3, which is the superintendent waiver's power, shall be subject to this board's approval no later than 45 days after it's granted. And that way, this board retains the ultimate power as to whether or not that waiver should be extended, ended, or otherwise. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Member Bogus?
So sorry, Coach.
Don't pull it out.
I know we've got problems with this device today. So through you, Chair, to Member Carey, I'm confused about the language shall that is coupled with the words if possible. So if we're saying shall, then we're providing but you don't have to, which would really just revert back to a may. So I'm trying to reconcile that in my mind. And I'm wondering if you can help me reconcile that in my mind, because I see where you're going, but if it's going to include the words if possible, why don't we just say may?
Chair Carey, we also have, I'd like you to answer if you're willing, but we also have Elise is willing. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Chair, and you can direct as necessary.
Yeah, I'll try and respond to that question if I may, Chair. So I think that the LEAs do bring all the available information that they have to help us better understand why they're seeking the waiver. But I do see situations like the student survey data. That may just not be something that they have on their waiver request. And Vice Chair Bollinger or someone else on law and licensing, maybe they can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know if we've received half a dozen waiver requests. I think maybe only one included data on what the students thought about that. Because I think when they see 4 days instead of 5, we know what their initial survey results may be. So that's why it says if possible, because they may not just have the data. Thank you.
Okay. Deputy Newey?
Thank you, Chair. Just as a little bit of context, we most often see this rule or this waiver being used for like the 4-day school week. However, it is a waiver for any rule. So there's often times where these types of backup documents aren't applicable. One change that we could suggest would be to say shall include if it exists, or pointing to its existence rather than possibility, maybe. Thank you.
I'm going to go back with that comment. I'm going to go back to Chair Carey, as this is his motion to make a decision.
Yeah, I would accept that recommendation, Chair, if we're able to do that. I would just say possibly if available versus if the suggested language. Thank you.
Is there, this motion is before the body. Is there any objection to this word change?
If data is available.
So there's some, let's discuss then. So, okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Again, we're getting kind of out of line here. I'm going to go back to Chair Carey and see if that's something that he would entertain, or if we need to bring this out formally.
Yeah, I would accept that as a friendly. Thank you.
The question I would have about this, we're getting into data compared to requirements of the waiver, right? So if me personally, I would go with what was originally there. I would have opposition to this motion here.
It's hard to believe these monitors are so big, but I didn't see the data at the beginning of the sentence. So I would say, yeah, I wouldn't accept that as a friendly amendment just because it does reference data at the beginning. So I would do it for a different reason. Thank you.
So this is the motion. I'm going to look to you, Member Kelly. Would you like to put an official amendment before the body?
No, I'll accept this.
Let's go over to Member Bogus.
So maybe semantics, but grammatically, I do believe it should go after the word data, set off by a positive commas. Otherwise, I don't believe it makes sense in its fuller context.
Not sure what so state that again. You're
So it
agreeing with Member Kelly that
Yes.
we would like it to say include data if available.
yeah,
Include
or
if
because I think we're looking at a weird sentence there that becomes very clunky because we're modifying the word data or commenting on it. It just
So-
seems out of place.
Is that what you're looking at? Data, comma, if available, comma, that support the
Yeah.
request.
So, Carol, hook me up. I think that's the grammatically correct way to say it.
We just had AAG Beal join. She must have something to say.
Not on that directly, I guess, but my concern with if available is just that often in these waivers, when I'm gathering these requests, I'm asking them to create some of this data, right? Like the parent and student surveys, I'm asking them to create that data. So it's not really if available, but maybe if applicable, potentially, because there are some waivers, like Deputy Newey said, where they aren't applicable because it's a different rule they're requesting to waive. But specifically on the 4-day ones, like I'm asking them to create that data. So it's not if it's available, it's if it's applicable to the rule.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Chair Carey, I keep putting you back on the spot. Hey, it's your motion.
Thank you, Chair, and I do appreciate the patience of the entire board. Like I said, it would have been my desire to get this in sooner, but I think it is important to get it right, especially since we're getting so many of these requests. And based on AAG Beal, not only her recommendation, but the time she's invested into this issue, I would accept that amendment if it's appropriate.
So, Member Carey, before we see if there's any opposition, will you just read line 34? Just make sure you're in agreement with this, and then we'll move forward.
That reads correctly.
Okay. So the motion before I'm sorry, Vice Chair Wood.
No, you're fine. Question to the maker of the motion. On, excuse me, lines 116 through 119, where we talk about the public health emergency, and then we insert that waiver has to be approved no later than 45 days. If we're in a public health emergency, that waiver would probably go in effect immediately. So you're saying, and so it's in, so is this kind of what's it called when you go back and ratifying? Are we ratifying the waiver? Is that what you're asking for?
Yes, Vice Chair Wood, that's exactly what this is. This doesn't change the superintendent's ability to immediately waive those requirements. The purpose of line 34 is just to give this board ratification or oversight of that decision. And that's why it says any waiver request granted, meaning it's already happened, we're just reviewing it. That was the intent. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Bogus?
Thank you. I am concerned that we don't have parameters around the language public health emergency. Does that mean that the local principal can claim a public health emergency and submit a waiver? I'm confused as to what that, like, without defining that language, I'm not really sure what you mean, sir. And so can you help me with that? Through the chair, of course.
Yeah, if Chair Carey has a response to that, this appears to be old language. So I don't know if we have a staff member who knows more about that. I give my own thoughts, but I'm
Can
sure
I
you're
tell
not
you my
asking for those.
concern?
Please.
My concern is that we concoct some public health emergency and start submitting waivers, and then there's no metric of what constitutes a public health emergency. Is it, and I'm genuinely being serious here, is it a tornado that comes through and we've got maybe some septic issues nearby? Is that a public health emergency? Are we dealing with something that resembles what we refer to as COVID? Are we looking at something where maybe there's a terrorist threat nearby and we're looking to suspend things long term? I just don't understand what we're defining as, and who gets to call that public health emergency if it's not pursuant to a directive from. That's just my question, is who gets to do that and what constitutes it?
Thank you. And I see Chair Carey's back on. We also have AAG Beal who joined the table again. So Chair Carey.
I would just add generally for the edification of the board that whatever the health emergency is, it must result in the closure of a school. And so there is that limitation factor that's in the current rule. So it would be more than just someone saying, this is a public health emergency. It has to be of such a nature as to warrant the closure of a school. But then I would defer to AAG Beal.
Thank you. So it can't be like 20 sneezes per hour we're cutting down.
Right. So
Okay.
under like F, if you look up to the 3 subsection, the big 3, it's an LEA may request the superintendent to waive the school day and hour requirement pursuant to a directive from the Utah State Department of Health or a local health department. So it does have to be declared by one of those local agencies first. And I will say also, yeah, this has been in existence. I've been here for over 3 years now, so I wasn't here obviously during the COVID pandemic, but I have yet to see this used at all. If anything, the ones that go to the superintendent usually result from excessive snow days. And I think at that, I've seen like 3 of them in my 3 years here. So this isn't one that pops up very frequently as well.
Thank you. Member, follow up, and then we've got Member Earl waiting.
So just to be clear, this language doesn't concern you? Okay.
Maybe it's not necessary. It seems like leaving it this way would encompass all those possibilities, plus all those we don't know about, right? That we couldn't possibly formulate, but it does go through a process. So I do think I just think the articulation that it's a public health emergency suggests that it's got to rise to a certain occasion, right? And I think taking out specifics of who decides is actually beneficial. Like it could be just that. It could be a tornado, whatever. And we're not waiting for certain entities to act on that. It can rise to that occasion as an LEA needs. So.
Okay, thank you. Let me restate the motion, and we will prepare to vote. Oh, Member Bollinger, go ahead.
If I may, just a clarifying question to the maker of the motion. the line that you want to insert at 134, does this mean then if we had a public emergency such as another pandemic, that if there is, it says any request that's granted has to be approved? Does that mean that if all 161 of our LEAs have a waiver, that we then have to approve all 161 within 45 days?
Chair Carey?
Yeah, so we wouldn't necessarily grant the waiver. That would be the superintendent, but this body would then have to review those the granting of those waiver requests no later than 45 days after it's granted. But the initial granting is handled by the superintendent, and that could be immediate. If that answers the board member's question.
Yeah, I Member Bollinger, does that answer your question? Okay. Chair Carey or staff, again, I hate to put you on the spot here. And I hate what if scenarios, but I'm going to give you one. What if the board votes to not approve it? Do they just go back into, within the 45-day window? If we say, yeah, we approve these 5, but not these 2, they would just have to revert back to their previous practices. Is that what I'm understanding? Chair, and then I've got Superintendent Dixon as well.
Yeah, my understanding would be that it would revert to the state prior to the granting of the waiver. So this board would basically be deciding that the initial granting of the waiver either was improper or no longer necessary. And it would revert to that status before the granting of the waiver. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Superintendent Dixon?
I am just historically thinking about when this has happened. So we'll tuck the pandemic away because that's a whole other conversation. But there was an incident where a rural area was really hit hard with a flu virus, and it basically wiped out the teaching force and about 2/3 of the kids for a week. And in concert with their public health department, which was a regional health department, they determined that they had to, they just didn't have the capacity to keep going, but it was late enough that they didn't really have time to add a day to the calendar, and they had an emergency day that had been used for a snow day. So like all the things were just lined up, and I researched with Angie Stallings at the time and felt like I did have the authority to waive them having to make up that day. Again, it was in consult with the public health department, which at the time fit within this rule, but there were like 3 or 4 rules that came into play. So I just bring that up because I think there will be those anomalies that will occur that will still involve the public health department, that could still involve some kind of health crisis. And it wouldn't have been prudent for me to ask for a special board meeting and try and call you all together to create that waiver. I mean, they just didn't have anybody to show up and teach. So I just want to make sure that there's an awareness of or some kind of instruction moving forward for the superintendent who would get in this kind of situation that I just described. Could you respond to that, either Chair Hymas or
Chair Carey, go
Member
ahead.
Carey?
I've determined that everyone at the table will be asking a question, so I'm happy to respond to that. I would say 2 things. One, this doesn't limit the superintendent's ability to act immediately. And if anything, I believe this change gives more power to the superintendent because now you can act without necessarily the state health department or local health department coming in and saying, we've officially declared an emergency. So if that tornado comes through and people are still assessing, but we know it's resulted in the closure of a school, which is the only precondition, the superintendent would have the power to act on that. So I look at it as an enhancement to that power.
Follow up.
And I think the emergency rule already applies to any kind of natural disaster. So, you'll have flooding in a school, a fire, any of those kinds of things are covered under another rule. But where this is directly tied to public health, that's why I just wanted to bring that scenario into play, because I think there are 2 or 3 rules that you have to fuss with a bit. So I think you've answered my question, that just knowing that there's a little broader scope than having to have some kind of official sign off from the public health department. I think I heard you correctly, but if not, we'll follow up. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go ahead and let me restate the motion here. The motion is that the board amend draft 2 as follows. Line 32 through 33, A, verification that the LEA board voted to request the waiver in an open meeting with the results of the waiver request. Line 34, B, data, if applicable, that support the requested waiver, which shall include. Line 36, double I, community, staff, and student survey data. Line 37, triple I, student enrollment data. Lines 116 through 119, 3A, an LEA may request the superintendent to waive the school day and hour requirement in the event of a public health emergency. And then insert at line 134, 3G, any waiver request granted pursuant to subsection 3 shall be subject to board approval no later than 45 days after it is granted. Board members, let's vote. That passes unanimously, which brings us back to the amended or the original motion, and that is that the board approve R277-121 Board Waiver of Administrative Rules, Draft 2 as amended on second and final reading. Seeing no comments, let's vote. Oh, Member Lear.
I just have to say publicly, as a board that has complained about red tape and excessive regulation, I feel like this, we've had, I think, successful grantings of waivers for 10 years, rarely had any hiccups with them, and I much prefer the simpler, more flexible language that existed without a few of these motions, or line changes. But I want you to know I did resist the effort to ask to separate these motions. So I am okay with it. I'm okayer with some of the stuff than with the 45-day thing. But I just would like some self-awareness on our part that we're adding red tape, just like we complain about.
Thank you, Member Lear. Chair Carey. Oh, you ready? Okay, let's let me restate the motion, and that is that the board approve R277-121, Board Waiver of Administrative Rules, Draft 2 as amended on second and final reading. Let's vote. That passes unanimously. Back to Chair Carey.
Thank you, Chair. Just one other item out of Elan licensing, and that is just to report that we had an informational item on Board Policy 2005, complaints against individual board members, meaning the policy, and that will be coming up again in tomorrow's session of Elan licensing. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.